forest near the village of Black Hollow was a place of shadows and silence, a labyrinth of twisted trees that blotted out the sun. No one dared enter after dark, and even during the day, hunters and woodcutters whispered of being watched by unseen eyes. At the heart of this cursed wood stood a crumbling stone hut, said to belong to the Hollow Witch, a creature older than the forest itself. The stories about her were as old as the village. Some said she was once a healer who had bargained with dark forces to save her child. Others whispered she was no woman at all, but a demon wrapped in the guise of humanity. Whatever the truth, those who ventured too close to her domain rarely returned, and those who did came back changed, haunted, pale, and whispering of horrors. One frosty autumn evening, a man named Corvin dared to enter the forest. His sister, Marin, had vanished a week earlier, her screams echoing through the trees. The village elders insisted she was lost to the Hollow Witch, but Corvin refused to accept it. Armed with a lantern, a knife, and sheer desperation, he set out to find her. The forest swallowed him whole. The deeper he went, the more the trees seemed to close in, their gnarled branches like skeletal hands. The air grew colder, the silence thicker. It felt as though the forest were holding its breath, waiting. Hours passed before he found it, the witch's hut. It was a wretched thing, leaning like a drunkard against the base of a massive tree. The stone walls were streaked with dark stains, and the air reeked of decay. Gathering his courage, Corvin pushed the door open. Inside, the hut was larger than it had any right to be, its walls lined with shelves of jars filled with things he couldn't, or wouldn't, identify. A cauldron bubbled over a fire that gave off no heat, and shadows danced along the walls in shapes that didn't match the room's contents. "You're brave to come here," a voice rasped from the shadows. Corvin spun, knife in hand, to see her. The Hollow Witch was both grotesque and beautiful, her face shifting like smoke. One moment, she was an ancient crone, her skin like withered bark. The next, a young woman with eyes as black as voids. "I'm looking for my sister," Corvin said, his voice trembling. The witch smiled, her teeth sharp and uneven. "Marin," she purred. "Yes, she came to me, so full of fear, so delicious." Rage overtook his fear, and he lunged at her. But she was faster, impossibly so. With a wave of her hand, the room twisted, and Corvin was flung to the ground. The walls of the hut seemed to breathe, closing in around him. "Foolish boy," the witch hissed, standing over him. "Do you think you can take from me what is mine?" "She's my sister," Corvin shouted. The witch tilted her head, considering him. "Then I'll show you." She snapped her fingers, and the shadows in the corner coalesced into a figure. It was Marin, or what was left of her. Her skin was pale and translucent, her eyes empty voids. She moved like a puppet, her limbs jerking unnaturally. "Corvin," she whispered, her voice faint and broken. "No," he gasped, reaching for her. "She belongs to the forest now," the witch said, her voice full of cruel delight. "But I'm not without mercy. If you wish to take her place, I can return her to you." Corvin hesitated, his heart pounding. He looked at Marin, her broken form trembling in the witch's grasp. There was no saving her, not as she was. But perhaps he could free her soul. He turned to the witch, his jaw clenched. "Take me." The witch's smile widened, and the hut seemed to shudder with anticipation. "A noble sacrifice," she said. "But the forest always hungers." She reached out, her fingers like claws, and darkness enveloped Corvin. Pain ripped through him as the forest claimed him, tearing away his humanity and binding him to its shadowy depths. When he awoke, he was no longer himself. He was part of the forest, a creature of twisted roots and endless hunger. His memories of Maren faded like a distant dream, replaced by an insatiable need to serve the hollow witch. Maren's body was found at the edge of the forest the next morning, pale and lifeless but untouched. The villagers buried her and whispered prayers of thanks, never knowing the price that had been paid. But the forest grew darker after that, its shadows deeper, its silence heavier. And at its heart, the hollow witch waited, her newest servant lurking just beyond the trees, ready to claim the next fool who dared to enter